like following the Grant Cardone. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what am I missing? But I didn't understand that at the time. I just kind of felt that emotion. I just felt like whatever I had wasn't enough, and I didn't understand why. Welcome to the Rational Growth Experience, where every week we talk about how concepts from personal growth and spirituality come together and are experienced in our everyday lives.
All right, so welcome to our podcast. This is the second episode of the Rational Growth Experience, my story and who am I? Now that's a really good question because I don't really know where to start. Um, Let me know if you have anything that you want to kind of include in this kind of
Yeah.
my story.
So I think you should maybe try starting with what what do you do for work? How'd you get into what you're currently doing? How'd you get into personal growth? What is it to you? Why? I think that's kind of where you should start.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, so me personally, I have been working at T-Mobile. Backtrack the background story. I was working at T-Mobile for give or take a year and a half, going on two, and just wasn't satisfied. I wasn't satisfied in what I wanted to accomplish. Um, and from there, I ended up trying out sales directly of more of a bigger product, which was cars. Um, Joined that, did it for probably like 3, 4 months. Wasn't my thing. It just wasn't where I envisioned myself because there was always that common misconception of the sleazy car salesman, and I didn't want to personally be represented from that. So I was like, okay, I was on YouTube. I always see Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone is always popping up. I'm like, this dude is always talking about real estate. What's real estate? What does that mean? How can I get involved? And from there, I just started digging a little bit more, saw one thing after another. I started my course. I started my online course. Um, and this is where I kind of just wasn't focused. I wasn't really knowing on how that career kind of was going to be implemented into my life. I started the course, finished it. Took me like 6, 7 tries just to accomplish that test because it's a hard test. If he can tell you, it's a very difficult test. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I failed 3, 4 times. I
yeah,
passed one on the third and then passed another on the fourth.
it's a difficult test in the way that it's worded. But anyways, I ended up getting into real estate. Been doing it for a year, and like I explained in my last video, it's a bunch of roller coasters in this career. It's difficult to be as consistent, at least from my opinion, um, for someone who is still newer in the sense. But I definitely have had that experience and understand that more of the mentality that it needs to be able to be successful in that career. Um, and from there, I just felt that something was missing, and I really started digging more in the personal development side. Now, bear in mind, personal development has always been something that I was wanting to get into. It started a couple years ago. I joined this, I don't know if I should name it, it's this social networking group called Amway. We'll just go for it, Amway. And I did it for probably like, I don't know how long I did it, honestly. It just wasn't me. I just wasn't the person to go up to someone like, hey, you wanna join me, and I'll get paid. And that just wasn't my personality. Um, and the interesting thing is, I did learn more of the personal development and how important it is to have that sense of mentality and how to just grow. You know, who said this the best? But there's those levels that a person should be going through each chapter, or backtrack a little bit more, is with personal development, there's multiple ways on how you can go to it. You plant the seed, the tree grows, and there's multiple branches on how you can visualize it, right? But yeah, no, that's, I guess in short, that's kind of my story and who I am, and we can go based off of that.
Wait, so okay, tell me what is the kind of timeline of all of this? Because obviously this is a summation of probably what years,
Yeah,
months, however
yeah,
many. Because I know there tends to be this at least for me, when I was getting into personal growth, it seems like everything comes so quickly. It's like, oh, that person has it right now. Why can't I have it? What am I missing? But I think, to me, I want you to tell like me how, and us, like how long was kind of all of this, and like where was your head at the beginning versus where was your head at now, and what do you think you learned during that, however long it was, that helps you kind of keep going even when it was
Mm.
hard?
So it, I think the full duration, it started give or take in high school. High school was not my thing. I used to ditch a lot, and I think that the more of the fact is I'm not going to dive so deep into that aspect, and it just wasn't for me, you know. And always was curious about how someone can be so successful and grow a company, for instance, or their mentality, whatever you may, the filler word that you might want to use. I was always interested in it, and never felt that I was getting fulfilled. There was always something more. You know, like you when you have your birthday, right? And you get a cake, and it's the good one. You just keep going back for more. You just keep going back for more. That's my journey with personal development. There, of course, it has ups and downs. I didn't think that I was always consistent how I should have been, and that takes a little bit more of being aware, right? I wasn't so involved how I should have been, and just thinking about this is putting me in so many other avenues of how I would want to take this conversation. But just in general, with personal development, it's a love-hate relationship. It's purely a love-hate relationship. I read this book called The Giver, and with The Giver is the aspect is just about giving, and you're going to always, well, without the expectation of receiving something. um Now feel free to chime in, because now, like I was saying, I'm going in all directions that I can really talk about
Yeah.
this, you know. So really, what would you kind of want to figure out of my journey
So
with
okay,
personal development?
I think the journey with it is, what was the jumping off point for you? Because it's like, from what you're saying, it kind of
Mm,
sounds like you're teetering a lot of the time, or it was the top of your mind, or clearly there was some sort of outside um, influence of like what is success. Like Grant Cardone, for example, clearly very financially wealthy, successful guy in terms of
mhm.
being an underdog, building his whole empire essentially,
Right.
which is a topic to talk about another time, is how do you define success and what does that look like, because success could be so many different things, you know. There's financial
Exactly.
success, there's, you know, like happiness success, there's relationship success, there's all sorts of different successes. So we'll talk about that another time, like how do you define success, what is that to you, and what does that look like. But for now, I think we should focus on what was that jumping off point, like the moment where you're like, you know, my shit stinks. Like whatever I've been doing
Mm,
sucks. And because of that, there's fireworks outside, sorry. But because of that, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to commit to this. Like, what was that jumping off point for you?
I
And then I'll tell
understand.
mine, because I have a jumping off point. Like,
Yeah.
I know I've shared it with you, but
Yeah.
I'll share it for sure pretty publicly.
So I understood. Okay, so let me take a step back. I was working at the car dealership. Wasn't for me. Ended up leaving back to my job at T-Mobile. Went back to T-Mobile part-time just because I wanted to focus more on the real estate. But again, I didn't know where that was going to take me, or how to begin, or where to go. Um, I just knew I didn't want to have a boss. A boss was someone that I wanted to become. I never really wanted someone to be able to tell me what I have to do, what I don't have to do. You have to go this way, you have to do this. It's just not something that really interested me. It was more in the sense, just repelled me more from it. I distanced myself from that aspect of wanting to work the regular 9 to 5 job. And ever since I made the jump of quitting T-Mobile, is really when I felt that sense of freedom in some sense, right? I felt that sense of freedom and just excitement.
So even before that, back it up a little bit. Like, what was
Mm,
the motivation for quitting? Because it's like that make like if I were first hearing this, I'd be like, what the fuck? Like, why'd you just quit? Like, clearly you maybe were learning some. If you're studying like the Grant Cardone kind of people, you're learning. Oh, I'm by working 9 to 5, I'm furthering this person's dream, not my own. Like, what was that point before that even got you to consider like that what you're doing wasn't good, or like what led you there? So for example, here I'll talk about mine just to make it
okay.
like easier. So this for me, the kind of jumping off point in terms of the transition of my life of like where it was going at the time versus what I was going to do now was, so this was 3 years ago, in 2017. um, so that year in particular was an interesting year for me. I had um, I was I was still playing hockey. I was playing junior hockey. I was lifting a shit ton of weights. I was eating very right, and I was working two full-time jobs.
Hmm.
So I was making the most money I'd ever made at the time. I was the most fit I'd ever been. I was full on lifting weights and eating like I was going to be competing in competitions, like
Yeah,
shows, like um, you know, um, I forget all the titles. There's
bodybuilding and
um,
powerlifting,
yeah. What's the other one? The
CrossFit.
it's more
There's
no the more
men's
natural
physique.
one. Yeah, physique. I was
Okay.
training for men's physique competitions. So I was super fucking lean. I was 165 pounds, 4.5% body fat. Like most lean, most cut, biggest I've ever been. I had a girlfriend at the time. I was making the most money I've ever been, and personally, I was still kind of miserable. It didn't make
Mm,
sense to me. Like I was like, cool, I did it. I was like, I have a lot of the things that should be happy. Like, what am I missing?
yeah.
Like now, granted, I wasn't making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I was making enough where I was comfortable. I had a girlfriend. Like I was had a lot of physical achievements, and so I'm like, what am I missing? I don't know what led me to that. Quite honestly, I don't. I just realized like I had that. I've been friends at this point. I've made friendships with very, very financially successful people that were arguably more unhappy than I was. And so I
Mm,
think I just started questioning life. I was like, what is my moral system? What is my values at this point? I was like, this person makes millions of dollars. He's one of my closest friends. Millions of dollars, has tons of really nice cars, like all the things that I like am striving to get, and I'm like, he is unhappy, like more unhappy than I am. What? I was like, I don't get it. I was like, I've put so much after studying all the, like following the Grant Cardone. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what am I missing? But I didn't understand that at the time. I just kind of felt that emotion. I just felt like whatever I
yeah.
had wasn't enough, and I didn't understand why. And I also somehow knew that making more money wasn't going to help it. And I think it was because I could see that one of my close friends had a lot of money, had all the things that I was striving for, but was more unhappier than I was. And so I think I was confused. I was like, what? So cue the downward spiral of a lot of things. Um, Tore my lateral meniscus, had to get surgery, quit, had to get out of hockey. Um, so that was the year going into 2018 where I had 3 surgeries, back to back to back. Also broke up with my girlfriend at that time. Poor breakup. I really loved the chick. I thought like things were going to go to the distance. Wound up not happening. Um, so all of this stuff kind of happens, and all the things that I could do, like play hockey, couldn't do. Working out, because I was transitioning from hockey into working out, and then I had 3 surgeries, so I couldn't work out. The value system of money, in my head shifted. I was like, what it meant to
Mm,
be changed. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was looking to do anymore. So basically in a year, things just kind of got flipped, and I was like, what the fuck? So I guess like that's my story. Then that got me into like, started putting me into a darker headspace. I'm questioning everything. Um, at this point, I'd started therapy. I'm going to therapy, trying to understand what the fuck I'm going through. Um, and then at some point in therapy, I was like, why the hell am I in therapy?
Right.
I wound up doing personal therapy, like one-on-ones, and then I did group, and I was like, why am I in this? I was like, we're talking about the same shit. Can we ever get past it? So for me, it seems like the breaking off point, or maybe the turning point, was the fact that I went to therapy. I was very against therapy because me going to therapy was me admitting to myself that something went really wrong along the way and I fucked
Mm.
up. And so it was like I had to take accountability all of a sudden of my shitty situation I found myself in. So that was kind of a big blow to myself and my ego. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I was like, therapy. So I go to therapy. And then, I'm like, damn, I feel pretty good. My mom was right. My mom was the one that pushed me into therapy. I really didn't want to go. She was like, you need to go. And because she's probably fed up of me calling her crying, like trying to figure out what is life.
Right.
And so she pushed me into therapy, and then finally, really enjoyed it. It did help a lot. But then at some point, I, I was like, this is another crutch. I was like, I don't want to go to therapy for the rest of my life. I was like, what can I do that can actually have permanent change? Because I think I just saw there was no light at the end of the tunnel for me. So, cue switching jobs now for me. I was still working at Lifetime Fitness. I was still working at a car upholstery shop. Then this is when I started looking into, okay, what can I do for myself? I was like, I'm very entrepreneurial mindset. I'd love to do some sort of business thing. Like, what's a good safe bet? Oh, real estate. Andrew came. We had played hockey together, so I knew who he was, and I saw that he was like doing really, really well in real estate. So I'm like, hey, what are you doing? I'd been keeping in touch with him over the years. It's kind of one of those weird one-off things. We weren't friends during hockey. We were on a team full of not like the greatest people, but we kind of had a mutual respect for one another. But we never really were friends. We never hung
Right.
out outside of hockey, so it was interesting. We go to coffee because I reached out and I was like, hey, like let's grab coffee. I want to know what you're doing. We start talking about neuroscience because at that point I was desperate to find anything to like be like feel happier. I was like started That's when I started asking a friend that I knew that was starting meditation, like, what does that look like for you? I was like, what is meditation? And then that's when I started looking up so many TEDx videos and like researching like what is meditation. Like, I thought it was stupid. I thought it was weird. I didn't understand it, but I just kept finding articles about like the scientific proof of why meditation is beneficial for your brain and how it can cause really good changes. And so I started tackling the science side of things, which is what led me into neuroscience. And so then come to this coffee with Andrew, we started nerding out over like neuroscience because I was pretty infatuated with the fact that the idea of neuroplasticity in the brain, which is your brain's ability to
Mm.
change, and that we could and I was like, what does that look like? So I was talking to Andrew. Andrew starts telling me, oh yeah, there's a guy that I actually been following that talks about this, but using meditation to influence neuroplasticity, not only in like to infect your brain, but also affect your body to create lasting change. I'm like, interesting. That's exactly kind of what I'm looking for. What is it? So that's when he pushed me into the Dr. Joe stuff. The Dr. Joe Dispenza becoming or Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself was the very first book.
Mm.
So, and then he's like, hey, and if you want to get into real estate, like you can join my team. He was just starting a team at the time. So I'm still in college. Um, was wanting to get out of college. I've switched degrees, I think, 2 times at this point. Start taking real estate class while working, while in college. Um, and then then take the real estate class. That's like 2 months. Took me 2 months to do. And then passing the test, I think 2.5 month timeline between all that. And then get into real estate, all real, like the real estate stuff. And I'll talk about that another time, but all that. And then what we talked about last time, showing these stuff, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that was kind of my journey. And so the jumping off point for me was when I had that kind of epiphany early on, like 3 years ago, when I was like, what am I striving for? I was like, I thought that me working harder, doing all and making more money and all this would make me happier. But the person, one of my close friends and someone I looked up to that had what I was looking for, doesn't have the other part that I thought would come, which is the happiness and all that. And I was like, oh shit. So the jumping off point was, for me, it was probably that moment when it might not have fully made sense, but somewhere in me it clicked that whatever I was doing was not going to get me where I wanted to go. And clearly my life started shifting to reflect that. And so that's what I'm trying to get out of you. Like, what was that moment for you? Like, that pushed you into something else?
Yeah, no, that
Or
definitely makes
or
sense.
was it kind of like a buildup of things? Because sometimes it's not always a moment. I think for me it was a buildup, but that to me was one of the more defining times that I remember that kind of pushed me into where we are now. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
No, that definitely makes sense. Well, for me, it was mostly just a build-up. So, like I was stating, I wasn't the best student in high school. You know,
Yeah, me
I always ditched.
either.
I always ditched. And whether that was just me not focusing in on the boring stuff that I was learning, because I just never got captivated in wanting to learn. You know, I was never that sort of person. Um, Once I got kicked out, because I did get kicked out, sent over to
Oh
an
shit.
alternative school. Yeah, yeah, I got kicked out, sent over to an alternative school, and there was this program, and I think this is where really this defining moment, we'll call it, really hit me. There's this discovery program where really it's something similar to this, where you're supposed to tell about your life story and you're supposed to graduate in order to get into that alternative school. Well, I talked about my story and who I am, and it was very refreshing. And I guess this is more in the sense of that therapy, right? That therapy of just being able to verbally execute it, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. Um, Once I finished through that program, this was 2014, give or take, 2014, so a couple years back. Um, I think that's when it like sparked, right? Sparked. And I ended up going through that program, really understanding who I am. And Mr. P, who is the one that directed that, he was big into the self development and understanding who you are and how you can grow and how you can keep pushing. He always pushed on that positive mental attitude. Um, and that always stuck with me. Okay, there's no reason in to be negative. And this, I think this, I'm getting a little bit off track, but it was that moment where I just felt that, okay, there's something in me with the personal development that keeps attracting me to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fast forward a little bit back. Once I graduated in 2016, graduated early, even though I got kicked out, which is great. Um, I tried to apply for college. Now, I applied for MSU, did not get accepted. And I was like, okay, I tried my ass off, did not get accepted. What the hell is wrong with me? And that's where I like started to negatively talk to myself, because once I graduate discovery, I don't have that Mr. P, for instance, that person who is constantly telling me the motivating factors. Um, so I didn't get accepted to college. Well, okay, what's the next couple steps for me? Get a job. Got a job,
Makes sense.
you know, got a job, went to Jack in the Crack. That's where I really started to put all
Jack
my
in the
effort.
Crack. Classic. A
Yes,
classic.
exactly. Yeah, and I started working there and it was going great, but I was like, again, I always wanted to be the hardest worker. Always wanted to be the one who is brightening up people's days. You're never going to catch me without a smile. And if you do, it's only in rare occasions. And once I fast forward a little bit more, because I don't like to get into the details, I'm not a person who really dives so deep into the opening up, right? I even struggled in discovery program. Like, I'm just not that person. And the big turning point is when I really started to discover the business aspect, because that's what I wanted to go for. My family is more of the entrepreneurial, that's who they are, you know. But they always pushed college to me. Well, okay, how does that look like? Well, I didn't get accepted to college. So what the hell am I gonna do now? Well, get a job. I started working, and I just didn't like the 9 to 5 job. I wanted to start my own thing, right? I wanted to start my own thing. That's when I really started to dive deep into the network marketing, and then the Amway and all the other. There's another one that I joined too, but they really started pushing more of the personal development. And
Hmm.
I mean, in some topic, that's just really where my turning point was, getting kicked out from high school and joining that discovery program. That's
So
really
kind
where
of,
I've evolved.
so basically the non-traditional routes and when I
Oh,
say traditional, I mean, go to high school, graduate high school, work
right,
a full-time job, go to college, work 2 or 3 jobs to pay for college, and then transition into your big boy college job. So that's what I mean by traditional. So you're saying traditional didn't work out for you. You're
hmm,
like, well, I don't get why it's not working out for me, but it's probably an opportunity for me to go do these other things or at least check it out. So you tried, but then you didn't really listen to yourself fully because you just kept getting 9 to 5 until you like reaffirmed that, oh, this isn't really what I need, at least not right now, or maybe not what you need, but what you want. And
right.
then, yeah, want versus need. That's definitely something I can
Another
rant about
topic.
for a while. Another topic. And then led you to real estate, which is its own thing, um, another
Yeah,
stepping stone, and then now into kind of where we are now, where I feel like this is something like it's really a step in to what you're wanting to do. Like,
right. And I just get so excited over things like this where I don't know where this is gonna end up. I'm not getting paid. You're not getting paid for this.
yeah.
Mostly,
Yeah.
it's like for fun. But and I never really believed in the entrepreneurial. Keep in mind, this is just my opinion. I never really believed in the entrepreneur because it was just tossed around. Like what the
Right.
hell did it actually mean to be entrepreneurial? I always thought like it's someone of a character who built up whatever thing that they wanted to do and created this extreme amount of success. That's just always that vision that I had for entrepreneurial. That's another rant that I really can go into.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say we can talk about like what is an entrepreneur and the glorified entrepreneurs and what that looks like and how it's construed. But yeah, anytime. Yeah, another time for sure.
it's just tossed around too much. But no, yeah, that's in short, that's just where I've been through. Really, if we wanted to learn about my whole story, you'd have to take me to therapy and record the whole session, and that's probably where you end up getting the whole story. Um,
No, I'll rip the story out of you. One of these
oh,
days, you'll start cracking and you'll start sharing,
yeah, no,
but it's not
eventually,
needed
eventually.
eventually.
Um,
But
it it's interesting on just the growth. I don't know if you've ever recorded yourself when you were in the early stages. I don't know if you've ever done that, but
when you
I
say the
have,
early stages, what do you mean?
like within personal development, like just seeing how little, like for example, this is more for visual people, seeing how little your framework was. This is another topic, dude.
So okay, I know where you're
before
going
I
with this.
before I go,
Okay, finish this really quick, and then then we're gonna leave it on a cliffhanger because that's how we're gonna end this. I just know
I
that's
can
gonna be
talk.
perfect.
I can talk for a lot more longer. But anyways, this is where we talk more about the framework. When you see your early stages, or when you're raised up and being conditioned through whatever it may look like, um, and there's multiple topics. Again, the branches, right? The framework is this sense that you currently have, or when, or I interpret at least. And when you really start to grow into the sense of personal development, then you start to expand and grow that circle, right? And really capture everything that you can. And that's, I guess that's just how I interpret it. Dylan, you might have something different that you might like to talk about, but that's the framework. That is going to be something we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess there's so many things. I'm like, what the fuck's a framework? What is this that I would be thinking about if this is my first time seeing it? What does that mean? But going back to your original question of what is what did you say? It was right before you started talking. You're like,
Did you record yourself, or like did
oh,
you
did you
capture
record
anything?
yourself?
Did you
Right.
capture yourself?
So No, cause
Mm.
not really. I recorded myself on a couple things, like for school projects and stuff I had to record, but I think I was so in my head so much of the time. I was, especially when I started learning about the whole Dr. Joe stuff and how I could change the way I think and how that the way I thinking is impacting my current and future realities, current, past, and future. That's a big topic. But how basically how I was thinking is impacting me right now. And once I learned that, I think I got even more analytical of myself because I'm already in my head a lot. Like I have a lot of like information flowing through me a lot of the time, and it's gets kind of overwhelming sometimes. But I've gotten really good at sorting through it and analyzing it and explaining it, and so that's what I'm excited to share here. But in terms of recording, no, I never did it because I just was in my head all the time. I could catch in the moment when things were happening because I started building that tool of what am I thinking? Is it what I want to think? So that's an interesting topic, and that's where we can start getting into awareness because that's where awareness answers that. But what is awareness? I don't know. But that's where we're gonna get into this next one.
Yes. I would say like right now would be a perfect ending because I think we kind of covered, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, as best as we possibly could with
Yeah,
my story. Again, I'm not the person who to really open up. Again, this might be something from where I was conditioned to, you know, and go ahead.
so with that said, I think the next few videos we should just call the foundation because we're just going to talk about like all of the foundational topics that you and I have built and that I've passed to you and Andrew for me and et cetera, et cetera. And we'll just call it the foundation where we'll talk about bigger topics like awareness and what do you mean by framework and what is that and um, conditioning, what is that and all of that. So I think the next few videos we should just call the foundation like 1, the foundation 2, or the foundation whatever. So
And that's
if you want to
perfect.
know, yeah, that'll be perfect to help understand. So that way we can build from there and talk about really, really in-depth stuff. But the foundation is going to be legit, probably the most important of it all.
Very entertaining, lots of information. And on that note, we're ending this podcast.
See ya.